Hello, I'm currently in Alberta, Canada for a 3-week music residency at the Banff Centre. I came here last year in January 2023 and I had a really nice time. That's where I recorded my album called Timelines, and just in general I had a lot of fun meeting new people and artists, and it sort of shaped everything that came after. So I decided to apply once again. This time I applied to a jazz program. It's jazz and sonic arts. So I brought a lot of gear with me, mostly electronics, with the goals of recording an album, recording live sessions, going into the mountain and recording live sessions there. And I would also like to start and finish the version 2 of my Cymbal MIDI controller. So this time I'm going to try to document my process through the whole residency. I have this new camera, which is a 360 camera, which is what I have in my hand. That's what I've been trying out for the past months, and it makes it much easier to document because I don't have to worry about the shots. You can choose your shot after recording, and also the sound is really good on this camera. I can even use it as a room mic, so I don't have to try and make a setup in my computer to record better sound of what I'm doing. I'm just using this camera as really a documentation thing, and it's capturing the sound that I hear while I hear it. So the gear I asked for while being here, I asked for this piano, I asked for a drum set, and then I asked for some studio monitors and a PA. What I brought is cymbals. I have really small cymbals because I didn't want to bring a cymbal bag, so these are 15-inch hi-hats, and I brought a lot of percussion like this, and bells, and this is a mini hi-hat that I made right before coming here. And this is not too bad. So even though I try to decide in advance what I'm gonna do, I don't actually know what I'm gonna do. And that's also a reason why it's really difficult for me to document, because as I go, my setup changes so quickly that I don't have time to stop and record every new setup I'm doing until I get to my final version, which then becomes an album. So when I arrived, the gear was not set up, so I started by emptying out the room, and then I set up the drums, and then I started working with this sort of little station. So I brought Habit pedal, Memory Man Deluxe, and BAM. I like Habit because it will constantly spit back anything that you give it. Memory Man I mostly use as a tone box because it has some chorus and it's a really nice preamp. And then I used BAM to sort of split it into stereo. So then this is going directly to the PA. Like, none of this is going to the computer, it's only in the room. So this is going to the PA, and what is feeding it is this microphone, which is an Omni mic EV635. I put in the ceiling, and the goal is to have it always feeding sound into these pedals and into the PA, which will then also feed it back. So I'm sort of playing with feedback, but I had set it up in a way that it won't feed, or it shouldn't feed. And so I'll show you an example. Yeah, so always like, but it also means that drumming will get through it. Because it's getting into this mic. So the goal is just to have this textures of sound like feeding it, like almost self-generative, but I'm also inputting sound into it. So that's its own little station that's separate from my computer setup or my synths or my drumming, but it's just to have something that's always sort of listening and giving back, a bit like playing with someone that's improvising with you. And then I also brought this, which I use as a voice, and later on I'll connect it to my computer so I can use MIDI as LFOs. Brought some MIDI controllers that are not plugged in right now. Then I also have these because I needed more inputs. So I have the X4, which has 4 inputs. The fourth one will eventually be this Geofon, which I'll decide where I put soon with this XLR. And these will be my mics for recording direct sound. I brought these clips, which are really good and compact because it allows me to hook it not only to drums, but also like to structures and stuff. And I sort of picked up random mics, which is also something I like because it forces you to be creative in your mixing afterwards. So I have a shotgun mic on this tom. I'm not using the snare because I want to use the snare laid on the chains on the speaker to add some rattle in the space. Then I have a kick mic, brought another kick mic, which I like on the floor tom. But the overall sound will always be this mic that's there, which is actually not going to my computer. So what I'm doing is I also have this Zoom with Bee's Knees KM84 mics. This will most likely be the main recording setup for all the sounds that will be in this album. I just haven't hooked it up yet, but it will be USB in to the computer, so I can set it up as an aggregate device in parallel to the Apollo X4, so that I have 6 inputs instead of 4. So considering all the sounds will be created from actually recording the space, and I'm trying to have physical sound in the space, that's why I have these sort of independent little stations. So this station will always be through the PA. That's a source of sound for the room. And then I'll have a more computer-based setup with this synth, which will be going through the monitors. So I get this sort of specialized sound in the room, and I'll be able to play within that sound with the drums and the piano and anything else I can do. This will also allow other people to walk into my space, improvise, and create this sort of immersive, generative sound installation. And then the goal is to record this on the station, make an album with it. And lastly, maybe I should talk about this. So I also have this little JBL speaker, which I removed the grill like this. Yeah. So I have this JBL speaker, which I removed the grill. This I like because there's a cable 1/8 input going to it, and then I can put some objects on it, link it to any sound source, and it will make some vibrations. And that's also something I can take in my hand and place onto stuff and have the sound resonate through that structure. Or I could put it on drums, which resonates through the head and stuff like that. I think that's it for now, at least for the recording aspect. And I'll try to continue documenting this as I go. Today I'm focusing on trying to create this drum sound. So I ended up removing the front head of the bass drum, and I used a curtain that was over there to put it inside, so to muffle the head and also to have support for the mic, which is now better isolated than when it was clipped on the side. The shotgun mic that was on the tom is now in back as a shoulder mic. Reason is because the source was too loud for this type of microphone this close. And actually from here it's very directional, so it's capturing sort of all the top end of the drums. This mic, the D6, something that's interesting about it is that it's really nice for toms. Well, I like it for toms, but it sort of has this EQ shape where there's a peak in the highs, which always gives a nice stick. So oddly, the D6 is a really good microphone for the cymbal stick sound. And lastly, the Geofon. I forgot the magnet, so I just started putting it on stuff to see how it sounds. And it's actually a very interesting room mic, even without being like directly on something. Sitting it on the snares like this gives this sort of sound, which to me is interesting, and especially if I start processing it after. Something like Pusher. It can be nice when blended with other stuff. The thing that was really interesting about recording the Geofon this way is it made me hear that actually from playing back the music in the room, I really like this. Usually when I use snare wires on a snare, I'll put it directly in front of a speaker, so you get a very intense like sound. But what is fun about this is that it's very like subtle, and you have the tone of the metal wires. So you have the din 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 din. Do you hear it? Basically what I'm trying to show, by starting to shape sounds according to what I have, like removing curtains, putting it in the bass drum, that liberates a clip which I can use for something else, forgetting the Geofon thing which made me put it on something. I would never have done that if I had not forgot the clip, and then playing this back in the speaker setup, trying to fix that sound so that it sounds like something I like, and then hearing this snare in the corner react to the sound of itself going back into itself. All these elements of experimenting and discovering are stuff that will end up shaping the end result. So it's mostly like a series of accidents and adapting, which allow me to then create sounds. Usually I would already have started recording sounds, but because I don't have a very long cable for the room mics, I'm waiting for this before starting. So right now I'm just experimenting with stuff and just trying to fine-tune a setup, create a template in Ableton so that everything is very quick to record, so that when I actually start, I don't have to think about anything. I can just open a session, load the template, press record, start making sounds, and then record everything I do and continue my process. Quick update, cleaned up my setup a bit. I asked for a bass amp, so now my modular synth is going directly through this bass amp with the snare on top for a bit of vibration. I moved the speaker that was here to here, so now I sort of have this four corner stuff plus this one in the center. Instead of using the F3 as the input for the effects of the computer, I decided to use the embedded mic of the laptop, so that frees up that to record the space independently of all the stuff. And I just spent about a half hour recording the sound of the room by simply having the binaural mics in my ears, because it was raining, which was pretty nice. And with the synth going through the bass amp, it was just a bit feeding into both systems on both sides, and then those self-feedback and also crossover for they're always like listening to the space, feeding themselves and also feeding each other. And so it was constantly evolving over 30 minutes, which was really interesting, and I was minimally interacting with it. I'll do a quick example. So just like anything can go in. So just having these sounds, all the little variations start amplifying each other, and then it accumulates and it starts deciding on its own what the tone is. And because of how I have it set up, it will never actually explode, because I'm using a lot of limiters for that side. And this side is going mainly through the memory man, and that will never clip, it will just like sort of a limiter on its own. So just having this makes it really nice. So basically like this, and this speaker has a gate on it, so it will only start being activated once the room reaches a certain level. And so when that mic gets enough gain, this will open up. So it was pretty cool to have these sort of evolving textures in both. And then it starts to have more chaos, which triggers more things. And as it's getting louder, this comes in with like high-end frequency sound and just slowly interacting with it. And I'll continue doing tests on this tonight. And that's it. Little studio update. So as I've been experimenting and playing it within this room, I think what's interesting is that because of the self-generative evolving nature of my setup, I have to sort of let go and trust that it won't explode or feedback. It's always sort of a balancing a sort of chaos. So instead of playing within the room with physical instruments a lot, what I've been doing is just setting up some very quiet textures and waiting for them to evolve on their own, and then I can sort of interact with these textures or just by moving around my bracelets or getting into the mics or my footsteps or just gently touching cymbals or the piano. I also didn't know what I was actually going to do with this recording, and more that I'm working with these sounds, I'm sort of creating these 15 minutes to 25-minute pieces. My goal was to create 8 and then from that shape an album, but I think that what I'm gonna do is actually keep them as is. I'm gonna work next week on reamping the sounds that I recorded, which could make them even longer. so it might be a 4-hour album or something like this. If people listen to it, good. If they don't, they don't. But I think I'm also trying to stop falling into the trap that I'm creating music for specific platforms like streaming and stuff like that, which with time have shortened my songs or music pieces. I think I just want to make some really long evolving textures that are immersive and that are representative of the time I spent in that hut. Right now I'm at 6 soundscapes created, and next week I'm gonna start undoing the setup I've done, creating a new setup, using these as a base or a sound source to create something else, and start stacking different iterations of that same sound. Quick update. I found that I like to have the sound of the speaker through this mic, which is a bit further, which means that you get a lot of the speaker sounds, but some of the room comes in. And so if I'm using this mic to send out to these speakers and then be shot back into the room, you get a bit of the general room sound, but with a focus on this speaker. And then I finally found the magnet for the geophones. Putting it on the snare like this makes it that you sort of capture this sound going into the snare, resonating in this cylinder of wood, and you get a bit of chain in it. It's not aggressive chain, it's a sort of resonant rattle that arrives on certain frequencies. And then I was using these binaural mics, which I can put in my ears, just as 2 individual mics using the H1N. And I've been using them for a few days directly on the chains and behind the speaker. And it was nice, but actually I find that placing them in the piano gives such a nice piano sound. It's very natural. Then other than that, I think it's all the same. I just wanted to show one thing, is playing the drums, which are then resonating through the snare with the snares, with the geophone as a magnet. It gives a really interesting sort of muffled drum sound, but it sounds very interesting to me. I'll show you an example of this sound with the mic, what I was doing earlier, the drums going to this mic, just through this monitor. Then another sound I wanted to show, just a drone. When it gets louder, it activates these chains. Okay, so the sound of this was going into Little Alter Boy, which makes it an octave higher. This was going into Echo Boy with the Memory Man preset, and then it was doing it again. So this was going back into another Alter Boy, bringing it an octave higher, and into Echo Boy Memory Man again, and gave this sound, which oddly sounds human. So this was from this. This sound. For example, if we start blending with the Geofon, which is this. It starts being really interesting. Especially when you mix it with the piano mic, which I forgot to turn on for the beginning. This is everything. You'll see when I clean this up and finish it, but that was an interesting experiment. From what I've been doing these past days, I think I'm understanding better what I want to do for live. What I've been doing pretty much is setting up a source sound, and then that's being transformed through various speakers in the room, and then that's being recorded and sent back. And I can start to play with this feedback loop of producing sound, having it pushed back into space, and that cycle is sort of me interacting with the space, which is doing stuff on its own. And that becomes a sort of game of me interacting with the space. So as I improvise, the space improvises, and we both feed off each other. I think I want to do that for live and for sound installations. Doing these little mini performances every day, I found it really easy to create something that's long and cohesive. Studio update. I spent the 2 first weeks using the room to create sound with those 2 sound stations, and I just changed the whole setup to concentrate on shaping those sounds into an album. I decided to configure the room into a sort of quadraphonic setup. So I still have the 2 PAs in these corners and then the 2 monitors. Instead of being individual stations, everything is controlled by the UAD X4. That way I can easily create movement through the speakers. And I moved the bass amp to the piano because I'd like to send sound of these tracks into the piano and then use the piano as a resonant chamber, and maybe with opening the strings too. That's why I have a contact mic, and I'll also probably use the Geofon and the Binaural Mics. And then the goal would be to start using all the tracks I have, which are basically the same sound but from different sources. I'll create a movement for each of them with XP for Live, which is a plugin I use to specialize sound. So I'd like to create a sort of immersive soundscape for each track that I have, and I have 9. and then record that movement with the binaural microphones in my ears to capture that movement. And that will be an additional layer to the sound to give it a sense of this space. I'm also reconfiguring the mics so that every mic is going to the Apple X4 instead of being again in those two stations. So even this mic here will be into the X4 so that I can record each sound into the computer while also controlling sound. So basically, instead of being in a sound creating setup, I changed the room to be in a movement setup. I still have these drums here if ever I want to play on top. In parallel to this, I have a show on Thursday. It's going to be a sort of noise duo with Ethan, who plays bass with a magic bow. He placed a sensor on his bow, and that's going to max, and so depending on the movement, he's able to control and process his sound. My cymbal controller is not optimal at the moment, so I'm just going to do a more simple just sound processing from the cymbal. And what I'm thinking is that I'll use the H1N as the sound interface. So what I'll do is I'll take this mic, I have an XLR to 1.8 adapter, that will go into Habit. Habit will go with a 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch into the H1N, and this will go to my computer as a sound interface. And then from my computer I can do some sound processing, most likely some granular stuff and saturation. I like to use granular synthesis to change the pitch of the cymbal, so then I can give myself different octaves. So I'll map this controller, let's say like 2 octaves below, 1 octave below, 1 octave higher, 2 octaves higher. And I usually have an EQ, reverb, and then some other effect. So I'll use this. If the saturation is very like warm and organic, like without being harsh, it gives these very natural tones. So I'll probably do something like this, and that will be a very simple setup. And actually, being rushed for this sound check is making me realize that maybe I could do shows without my big interface. I could simply use this little H1N, which is much more portable, and I can hook it to the cymbal stand. I think that's it for now. As I said, I have 9 tracks, which are all ranging from 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And my goal is to reshape them through this room to add more texture, so that when I leave this residency, I have enough material to mix it into something nice. And a last project I want to do before I leave and after I do all of this is I want to go to these resonant places on campus and reamp some sounds through those to get some other spaces back into this space. And then I will be done for this recording project. And also another thing I want to do this week is to try to do more collaborations with people who are here, because several people mentioned they would like to play within the space. So that's it. Now I have to sleep. Bye. Quick update while I'm working on this. So this one cymbal setup, I have this mic under the cymbal. This is going through the Habit pedal, and this is going to the Zoom H1N, which acts as the interface to my computer. And I have this controller, which I'm slowly mapping to different parameters of effects in the computer. If I were to perform, I can start with the acoustic instrument so people understand. Once people have understood what the sound is, then I can start bringing in effects. And I think I do this so that it's obvious what I'm doing, because I think that helps people connect to the performance if they can understand that the sounds are coming from the cymbal. The simpler it is effect-wise, the easier it is to play, and also people can understand better what you're doing and connect to it. And I think then you can rely on actual sound, source sound differences to shape the effects, instead of having so many effects that you lose what the source is and the connection between physical movement and the output is lost. As I'm recording, I'm trying to think about how I create music, and I think that after creating soundscapes that are more noise-based, I try to find textures I like. So it's not necessarily chords or drones or specific pitches, it's more like textures. And then I start assembling this world of textures, and the more time I spend in it, the more I start hearing these specific notes, and then that guides what I can do on other instruments that have pitches. And so it's almost as if I'm hearing for tones in noise and amplifying them with a melodic instrument. I think that's also why I like to record the melodic instruments while the noise textures are playing, so that both are stuck together in a track. And then I don't have to think about blending the melodic with the noise in post, because it's done in a real space. And for example, this is the piano that I just recorded with two drones, so this big one and one that was higher pitched. So the lower drone with the higher pitched drone, while the other ambient textures are moving around the space. And the result, it gives this sort of track for the piano. I did cheat a bit with a low cut to reduce the drone, and I have this telephone simulator with Echo Boy, but mainly it becomes a melodic noise sound. So I think that's how I proceed, because the same thing happened yesterday night when I was trying to start building this other piece. And then what I might do is, if I just want to be safe and have the option to have the melodic instrument separate from it, I might just play the piano freely over nothing in this space, so that I can, after when I'm mixing, add it somewhere or have this sense of melody that sticks out in certain parts where it's more noisy. I re-recorded the piano with these mics inside, and then I mixed it in with my music, and now I'm outputting it through this tiny speaker, and I put it on top of this because it makes it resonate through the metal structure. And then I will record it with room mic and other stereo room mic, and that will replace the telephone effect I had put on the other piano, so it's more embedded in the space. while I'm doing stuff like this, even though I'm taking time to shape each sound individually, and then I shape each sound in the room by spatializing it, and then I reamp and I re-spatialize each sound, and I'm constantly reshaping sound like this. And then it's possible that, like I've just done right now, when I passed that sound through that mini speaker in this big room, this to me feels like it had the biggest emotional impact for this music, because this speaker is not as high fidelity as the other speakers, because it's not that loud compared to the room sound and the sounds coming into the room. So it means that the recording from the room mics that are right here will be sort of pretty noisy with exterior sounds. I also have the windows open so that you hear the street, people practicing, birds, people walking by. And then you have this tiny speaker trying to compete with all of this in this space. And it's possible that this single sound will be the most emotionally impactful. When I will get to the mixing part of this music, I will most likely mute everything, open these mics from the performance of this speaker, and then build around it. All this to say that it's a very long process of shaping, reshaping, shaping, reshaping, and cyclical reamping to then end up with all these little details into this speaker that then has its own details into these mics that has its own details into the room. Because there's so many layers of physical processing and iterations of the same thing over and over that you can feel that it's a real sound, but you don't know exactly what it is, and that's because of all these processes. I should also say that the fact that I am always reamping the whole track at once and listening and sort of being in the same space forces me to listen and experience each sound in its entirety. It's a long process, and so it gives me maybe more time to really listen to each type of sound that comes through. So that piano I just did, which was like this. If you slow it down 2 octaves. So now I can build on this for harmonic content. Something else I should show. So let's say you have this piano track. So you pitch it up. You choose beats. Now you get this super glitchy thing because it's messing up, because it doesn't really know what the transients are at that speed. So you get this sort of loopy glitch sound from the piano, which will be in pitch with your track because it's all the right notes. So then freeze. Okay, so now you've frozen the track. So you still have this sound, but now what you can do is bring it back down to normal pitch. So now you get a sound that's glitchy, but it sounds like a real piano, because it is a real piano. And it's actually your playing that has been mangled. So it's sort of the same process as I do in real life with the cyclical reamping or pitching up, pitching down in physical space. But you can also play with it virtually or digitally to get these sounds. And then let's say I combine with the bass as I had earlier. what I just did is I'm sidechaining the glitch piano from the bassier piano, and just this you already have something that's pretty cool. Then you can combine again everything you had. So that's another way I use to add melodic content to more noise based or soundscape based music I have. It allows you to play something very simple or easy. Like this is I'm just playing any note I hear in F minor. Although I did put a piece of paper in the piano to add some weird sounds to the strings. So I'm basically just playing whatever in F minor so that it fits with the end of the song, which becomes in F minor. And that's a way to make it a bit less cheesy by playing with the glitch. So pitching it up, freeze, pitch it back down. Play with the fact that Ableton has trouble understanding what the transients are when you're adding all these artifacts into a sound to make it glitch and a bit more interesting. I have about 2.5 days left here, but there's also shows and activities and closing ceremonies. So I'm really running out of time to reamp everything I wanted to do. It's an extremely long process to take all the music that I have recorded, which was about 3.5 hours, mix it, specialize it, and then start reamping with all these mics while adding other textures to shape it into a song or shape it into a musical work. How I was going about it in the past nights was to go in the order that I had created it, but I can spend a full night on just one. So right now I may be on 4 pieces of the 11 that I recorded, but also as I'm going through it, although some that I recorded felt good in the moment, I think some are a bit too similar because I had this same setup for a while when I was creating sound. And although they are individually interesting, I think some of them fall too quickly into this sort of feedback drone. And it's also almost always the same pitch because it's my memory man pedal feedbacking off the frequencies of the speaker hiss in the room. So I think what I'm gonna do right now is go quickly through everything I have recorded and start removing those that I feel less passionate about, or at least prioritize those that I know and I want to keep. And also today it's raining. So far I have about 50 minutes of music. I'm working on another piece which is 11 minutes. And I just finished spatializing the sound so that it feels good in the room. So now I'm gonna reamp using these 2 room mics. And I decided to place this little speaker right in front. It gives this sort of hissy lo-fi in the center of all this more bassy sounds. I think it's interesting. It sounds a bit like this. I've always had difficulty blending drums into ambient. The reason is because my process is so textural that I find it weird to have really high quality drum recording on top of that. But that made me conflicted in the past as drums are my main instrument. So I felt weird to record it good, and then I would always end up like removing mics and stuff because I had trouble blending both. Then what started happening is that I would process the drum sound, so I would most likely start muting mics and then using just one, which was often the room mic, and treating it with different effects, like sound degradation effects, to help it blend with the music. And last year, when I was recording drums, I was also reamping sound. So I was just simply playing over sound as I was reamping, which as a result had that when I would then process the sounds, the drums would get affected as well. And I like that process because it then makes it sort of sound design. So sometimes what I'll do is what I'll show you right now. I'll play the music. Then I have these recordings. So this is just one mic, it's the shotgun overhead. And then if I start playing with the warp settings, I'll put it on beat. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll duplicate the track and I'll have one at the normal pitch and blend it with the lower pitch. And with beats, what happens is that it glitches because it doesn't understand my transients. So if you go lower, you can hear the sound cutting out, which I find really cool. And it starts sounding more like ambient music. And you can blend it with the original mic. So then, let's say you bring it back with the music. So that's the way I like to blend real drums, and then I would most likely reamp it through the room to make it more real. I should add that even though I'm doing all this now and showing step by step, I might not use any of this in the end. I'm just trying to record as much as possible and give me more options about sounds that are created in the room. And although I'm leaving myself some options, I always freeze all the plugins in the track so that I cannot go back. But I will have options of different versions of the sounds. And then when I construct the final soundscape in the mixing stage, then I'll start deleting tracks or blending together, hiding them, and making something that's a bit more interesting to listen to than all tracks open all the time. So I try to mix and guide the focus to specific sounds so that the ear stays entertained while listening to it. Even though it's very repetitive, minimalist, and meditative, I do try to keep attention to what I want to show. For example, even though I showed that thing about pitching down the drums and how I like to have that sort of drumming in more textural music because I find it easier to blend, it's possible that in the end I'll just keep this. So this is the original mic, but I cut off almost everything up to 10K. So you just get this very tiny spike of sound. And then this blended into the rest. Because everything is so already bassy and moody, you just have this little spike, barely noticeable, but it comes out, and that's the drum beat. These are the binaural mics I use. They go in my ears, and then I can become the microphone, and it records the specialization of sound. So sometimes if I like the movement of sound I've done in the space, then I'll just put these on and record the mix so that it can translate to headphones, or sometimes I'll just use it as another layer of sound, which also means that I have to sit through each song in its entirety to record it like this. I think I'm done with all my recording and mixing for here. So I'm revisiting the songs that I cut, and because I'm set up for drums, why not? I'm just trying to see if drums can fit on those songs. So for example, this is a song I cut, soundscape I cut. Although I did like it, but I just didn't feel like playing piano on top or bass like I did for the other ones. But actually I think it works with this drum. So that might be the song. I tried all the beats. And it sounds distorted because I put my favorite plugin, which is Culture Vulture. I mean, this is not mixed, but I'll blend this with the sound of the overhead, which is this. So. I think I've said it a lot in these little video diaries, but I brought very small cymbals so that they would fit in my luggage, and also to sort of have that as a constraint to the music, because I can easily fall into more of a jazz thing where I'm cymbal heavy. I worked a long time by removing the cymbals from the drum set so that I could focus on playing just the drums, which made me experiment more with like rims or textures, just how you can replace cymbals with drums basically. And then I brought them back into my set a few years ago. Right before I left I had cut this little chime, and actually it almost sounds like an average hi-hat. So I like it very much, and it means that it's portable. And then this is my hi-hat bottom. Which is nice, especially combined with the drum tortilla or something. The crash sound is very short, combined with a lot of overdrive. Still get the definition of each drum part, but with that saturation. And I think actually for ambient it will work well. Well, ambient, sort of ambient music. And also this means that for travel, this and this fits in a normal backpack along with my computer and pedals. So I don't need an additional cymbal bag for the plane or anything like that. What I'd like to do when I go back home is to make a custom small cymbal, maybe out of steel, so that it's a bit darker in contrast with this. Now headed out to do the last thing on my checklist, which was to reamp some sounds in the silo. The silo has a 8-second reverb, and I think it's nice. And I just wanted to capture some sounds in that space for this recording. I realized I could hook my field recorder rig onto this clamp. So my goal is to clamp this to the guardrail, and I'll also use my binaural mics in my ears. you.